Uncle Hayes presents the greatest historical NBA drafts. The 1950 NBA draft was the first draft following the merger between the Basketball Association of America and the National Basketball League, giving the BAA a brand new name, National Basketball Association. I think it's pretty catchy. The Minneapolis Lakers, with their four-headed dragon of George Mikan, Jim Pollard, Vern Mickelson, and Slater Martin, had won the 1950 championship, defeating the Syracuse Nationals in 6 games. Besides the Lakers and the Nationals, some of the other best teams heading into this next season were the Rochester Royals, the Fort Wayne Pistons, the New York Knicks, and the Indianapolis Olympians. I would name some more teams, but of the 17 that played in the 1949-50 season, only 11 remained by the start of the 1950-51 season. The NBA lost 6 teams after the summer merger. 3 of the teams, the Anderson Packers, the Waterloo Hawks, and the Sheboygan Redskins, jumped over to join the National Professional Basketball League. This was essentially the NBL 2.0, but it only lasted 1 season, and didn't even have a championship series. Bummer. The other 3 teams, the St. Louis Bombers, the Denver Nuggets, no, not that Denver Nuggets, this Denver Nuggets, and the Chicago Stags, folded before the start of the NBA season, but more on that later. The draft took place on April 25, 1950 at the Biltmore Hotel in Chicago, Illinois. While there was already a rule in place deciding that teams with the worst records would get higher picks, the previous year the BAA created the new territorial pick. If a team wanted to use their territorial pick, they would forfeit their original first-round selection, but in return, they would gain the territorial rights to draft a player who played at a college within a 50-mile radius of the team's home arena. Professional basketball teams were still struggling to gain attention on the national scene. Attendance numbers were low, and oftentimes the teams were not prioritized when it came to home playing dates at their arenas. Madison Square Garden only gave the Knicks 18 home playing dates for the 1950-51 season, preferring to allocate most dates for college teams. So the territorial pick was created in the hopes of increasing local fan support and turnout at games, since college basketball was far more popular than the NBA was. The Philadelphia Warriors decided to use their territorial pick to select Paul Arizin, a 6'4" forward from Villanova. Arizin was a standout player, but, fun fact, he didn't even play for his high school basketball team. He only made the Villanova squad after Coach Al Severin saw him play in a pickup game in the Catholic Club League in Philadelphia one night. I know, random. Arizin did not let the opportunity go to waste. In college, he used a revolutionary new style of shooting called the jump shot, where he would use one hand to hold the ball, another to guide it, and then jump off the ground as he would shoot. Crazy stuff, I know. The more popular shot at this time was the set shot, where players would use 2 hands and release. But Arizin's new jump shot worked out just fine for him. In 1950, he led the NCAA in scoring, was a consensus first-team All-American, and the Helms Foundation and Sporting News Player of the Year. With that territorial pick out of the way, the Boston Celtics selected Chuck Scher, a 6'11" center from Bowling Green, with what is considered the first actual pick of the draft. Scher was Bowling Green's all-time scoring leader with a total of 1,730 points, and was a third-team All-American in 1950 with the Associated Press and UPI. Many Celtics fans, however, were disappointed that new Celtics coach and general manager Red Auerbach didn't select local hero Bob Cousy, a 6'1" guard from Holy Cross University. Celtics owner Walter Brown also wanted Cousy, but Auerbach believed the team should prioritize height above all else. Quote, "I don't give a damn for sentiment or names. That goes for Cousy and everybody else. The only thing that counts with me is ability. I'm not interested in drafting somebody because he happens to be a local yokel." Unquote. Oof, harsh. With the second pick, the Baltimore Bullets selected Don Rayfelt, a 6'7" forward from Wisconsin. In 1950, he was the most valuable player in the Big Ten Conference and was a consensus second-team All-American. Upon graduation, several top college players participated in a World Series of basketball, where they would play games against the Harlem Globetrotters. Rayfelt ended up being the top scorer among all college players, thanks to his trusty hook shot. With the third pick, the Tri-Cities Blackhawks selected Bob Cousy, the 6'1" local yokel from Holy Cross. Cousy was a passing wizard, known for being a very capable dribbler with both his left and right hands, and could pull off some wacky things like behind-the-back dribbles, despite dribbling violations being much more strictly enforced than they are now. With the fourth pick, the Washington Capitals selected Dick Schnitker, a 6'5" forward from Ohio State who might just have the best name in NBA history. In addition to being a first-team All-American in 1950, Dick had also played for the Ohio State football team in 1949, after he was asked by Coach Wes Fessler to step in and replace an injured player. With the fifth pick, the Chicago Stags selected Larry Faust, a 6'9" center from LaSalle University. Despite zero accolades in college, Faust went as high as he did mostly due to his brilliant play that led LaSalle to their first ever postseason performance in the school's history. With the 6th pick, the New York Knicks selected Erwin Dambrot, a 6'4" forward from CCNY. Earlier that year, CCNY had won not only the National Invitation Tournament, but also the NCAA Championship, the only time one school has ever managed to win both in college basketball history. Dambrot was the tournament's most outstanding player, so he was definitely of special interest to the Knicks. With the 7th pick, the Fort Wayne Pistons selected George Yardley, a 6'5" forward from Stanford. Yardley was also a great jump shooter, much like Arizin, although many people agreed. Yardley had much more flair, and was more aesthetically pleasing to watch. With the 8th pick, the Indianapolis Olympians selected Bob Lavoie, a 6'7" forward from Western Kentucky. Thrice, he led the Hilltoppers to the NIT tournament, and in 1950, he was named a second-team All-American after an impressive record-setting junior year. But that's not even the most remarkable thing about him. After graduating high school, he joined the Army during World War II, and even saw action at the Battle of the Bulge. With the 9th pick, the Rochester Royals selected Joe McNamee, a 6'6" forward from the University of San Francisco, who was the second-best player on the 1949 NIT championship team. With the 10th pick, the Minneapolis Lakers selected Kevin O'Shea, a 6'2" guard from Notre Dame, who had been a first-team All-American in 1948 and was a second-team All-American in 1950. And rounding out the first round, with the 11th pick, the Syracuse Nationals selected Don Lofgren, a 6'5" forward from the University of San Francisco, who was the best player on the 1949 NIT championship team and a 1950 second-team All-American. The 1950 NBA draft was also the first draft that broke the color barrier. The Boston Celtics were in serious disrepair, and both Red Auerbach and Walter Brown knew they needed some serious talent. Of all the players that were still available in the second round, one guy stood out to both men. Chuck Cooper, a 6'5" forward from Duquesne. Red personally scouted Cooper and saw that he was a strong player and tough on defense, which were two of his biggest qualifying factors when it came to drafting players to the Celtics. Integrity was also big for him, and Cooper was coming from an excellent college program. So, with the 12th pick, Boston selected Cooper. Contrary to popular belief, there had been black players in the pros before 1950. Well, sorta. In 1946, Rochester Royals owner Les Harrison signed Dolly King and Pop Gates, two former Harlem Globetrotters. This was before Jackie Robinson had even played for the Dodgers, mind you. Not soon after Harrison signed the two, Ben Kerner, future Hawks owner, who at the time was trying to establish a franchise in Buffalo, asked if he could have one of the players so that Harrison wouldn't have to butt all of the negative attention himself. So Harrison gave Kerner Gates. And then in 1948, Don Barksdale of UCLA played for the U.S. men's Olympic basketball team. However, that was on the collegiate level, and in the case of Gates and King, both men were in their 30s and the twilight years of their careers, unlike Cooper, who was just coming out of college. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention the legendary 1948 showdown between the Harlem Globetrotters and the Minneapolis Lakers, where the Globetrotters won a narrow victory, 61-59. While the racial implications of the contest may not have been on the minds of the game's organizers, the all-black Globetrotters defeating the greatest pro team in the country sent a message, and no doubt laid the groundwork for black players eventually being accepted into the pros. Besides fears that too many black players would turn away white fans, the NBA owners were worried that drafting black players would anger Abe Saperstein, owner of the Globetrotters. Saperstein was an asset the league could not afford to lose, as he would often host doubleheaders with his Globetrotters and then an NBA game afterwards. Most fans would reportedly leave after the Globetrotters finished playing, but still, he was trying to give them as much press as possible. And because he had given black players a chance when no one else in basketball would, franchises didn't want to raid his talent pool, so to speak. Cooper was also a player Saperstein had his eyes on, so the NBA owners were sweating bullets. After Brown had announced the Cooper pick, one of the other owners leaned over to him and said, "Don't you know that he's a Negro?" The day after he was drafted, Cooper sent Walter Brown a letter, thanking him for drafting him. Another black player, Earl Lloyd, was selected by the Washington Capitals with the 100th overall pick. Lloyd was a 6'6" forward from West Virginia State. He was known for his tenacity on defense, and was given the nickname Moon Fixer. But the first black player to ever sign a contract with an NBA team was Nat Sweetwater Clifton, a Harlem Globetrotter who signed with the New York Knicks on May 24, 1950. Clifton claimed to be a 28-year-old 6'8" forward, but those who played with him say that he was really over the age of 30, and was actually closer to 6'5". He was named Sweetwater because of his love for soda. One time, he had dinner at George Yardley's house, but Yardley had no soda. So, Nat promptly left and brought back 6 cases of soda. "No house should be without sweet water," he said. Ironically, he was a huge hygiene freak despite his constant soda drinking, reportedly taking 2 to 3 showers every day and brushing his teeth every game during halftime. But I digress. With the 16th pick, the Washington Capitals selected Bill Sharman, a 6'1" first-team All-American guard from USC. But he had also signed a $12,000 contract with the Brooklyn Dodgers with the intention of playing both professional baseball and basketball. A few other notable selections from the draft include Paul Unruh, a 6'4" forward from Bradley and the final member of the 1950 All-American First Team, who was selected 20th overall by the Indianapolis Olympians. Bud Grant, a 6'3" guard from Minnesota, who had won a championship with the Lakers in 1950. Wait, why the heck did they draft him if he was already on the team? Yeah, the Lakers accidentally forfeited a 4th-round pick due to a weird rule Commissioner Maurice Podoloff had implemented for the 1948 and 49 BAA seasons, primarily to save BAA talent from jumping leagues to the NBL. But now that the two leagues had merged into the NBA, the rule no longer applied. Sadly, no one bothered to tell the Lakers about the rule change. Anyway, Norm Major, a 6'5" forward from CCNY, who was selected 49th overall by the Baltimore Bullets, and George King, a 6' West Virginia guard selected 89th overall. Not only was 1950 the first NBA draft, but it was also the first double draft in league history. On April 25th, the St. Louis Bombers held a dispersal draft, and through that, the Celtics were able to grab Ed Macauley, a 6'8" center who was coming off a solid rookie season. Speaking of Boston, they were also one of the 3 teams who were trying to draft the 3 Chicago Stags players that were now available for dispersal: Andy Phillip, Max Zaslofsky, and Bob Cousy. Wait, Cousy plays for Chicago now? Heck yeah! Cousy made it very clear with Blackhawks owner Ben Kerner that he wasn't very enthusiastic about going pro, and that he was happy just teaching women how to drive cars in Massachusetts. You heard that right. Since Kerner wasn't willing to pay him a bigger salary to compensate for his moving expenses, Cousy was traded to Chicago, who folded not soon after. Because the 3 club bosses of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia couldn't agree on which team would get which player, Maurice Podoloff decided to simply write the names on 3 slips of paper and then draw them out of a hat. New York got Zaslofsky, Philadelphia got Andy Phillip, and Boston got Cousy, which reportedly nearly made Walter Brown fall to the floor in anguish. And here's how the 1950-51 season turned out. Well, attendance and promotion continued to be a problem for the league. However, the biggest story of the year didn't even involve the NBA. Well, not directly, at least. In January of 1951, a major college basketball point-shaving scandal was uncovered that had been going on in and around New York since 1947. 33 players from various schools were implicated, and most of the schools initially revealed to be involved were all from New York: CCNY, Manhattan College, NYU, and Long Island University. But other schools such as the University of Toledo, Bradley, and even the championship-winning University of Kentucky were later implicated. Most of these fixed games just so happened to take place in Madison Square Garden. This entire scandal paid the salaries of many NYC newspaper writers and journalists for months. All the while, the squeaky clean image of the Knicks, and the NBA as a whole, inadvertently led to the young league getting a good bit of press coverage. With the college game having been knocked down a peg, more and more playing dates began to be booked for the NBA teams at the major arenas. And to keep it that way, the NBA did as much as it possibly could to distance themselves from gambling. 2 of the players drafted in 1950, Erwin Dambrot and Norm Major, had participated in point shaving the previous year at CCNY, although Dambrot chose to pursue a career in dentistry rather than professional basketball, so he was able to get away from the scandal relatively unscathed. The same cannot be said for Norm Major, who became the first player ever to be permanently banned by the NBA after only 24 games with the Baltimore Bullets. This season also had 2 of the most famous, or I suppose I should say infamous games in NBA history. In a game between the Lakers and Pistons on November 22nd, 1950, Fort Wayne defeated Minneapolis with a final score of 19-18. Yes, you heard that right. Since the league had not yet created the 24-second shot clock, players were free to hold on to possessions for minutes at a time. A month and a half later, on January 6, 1951, the Indianapolis Olympians defeated the Royals 75-73, after 6 freaking overtimes. Both of these games were reasons that the league eventually adopted the shot clock. This year, the NBA decided to start tracking rebounding numbers, which is pretty cool. I like rebounds. There was also a new rule introduced, where teams would have to participate in a jump ball after a foul shot if it occurred in the final 3 minutes of the game. This rule isn't in the NBA anymore, as you may be able to tell. On March 2nd, the NBA also held a weird new thing called the All-Star Game, where the best players from East and West divisions played against each other. Rookies Bob Cousy, Paul Arizin, and Larry Faust were selected. When the Chicago Stags franchise folded before the start of the season, originally a new Chicago franchise, called the Bruins, which was a real team that had played in the ABL and NBL, was set to join the NBA. The team would have been owned by Abe Saperstein, but ultimately negotiations fell through, and the city of Chicago would have to wait a little over a decade and a half to finally get another chance at a franchise. But I don't think they mind too much, because that team did alright for themselves. The Washington Capitals folded midway through the 1950-51 season, after 35 games. By the end of the season, the Rochester Royals had won the NBA championship, defeating the New York Knicks in a tight 7-game series, the closest the NBA has ever been to seeing a team come back from a 3-0 deficit in the playoffs. The All-NBA first-team selections were as follows: Rochester's Bob Davies, Indiana's Ralph Beard and Alex Groza, Boston's Ed McCauley, and Minneapolis's George Mikan. Members of the All-NBA second team included New York's Dick McGuire, Philadelphia's Joe Fulks, Tri-City's Frank Bryan, Minneapolis's Vern Mickelson, and Syracuse's Dolph Schayes. And here's how the 1950 draft picks turned out. Paul Arizin was the 1951 Rookie of the Year, thanks to that jump shot thing of his. In his career, he made 10 All-Star games, 3 All-NBA first teams, 1 All-NBA second team, led the league in scoring twice and field goal efficiency once, won an All-Star Game MVP, and won a championship in 1956. On top of that, he served 2 years in the Marines in 1953 and 54, so respect. Ironically, Chuck Scher never did play with the Celtics. He instead signed with the Waterloo Hawks in the National Professional Basketball League. When the league folded after one season, Scher returned to the NBA, but by then his rights had been traded to the Pistons. After 2 seasons with them, Scher then spent 7 years with the Hawks, and even won a championship in 1958, before retiring with the Lakers in 1960. Don Rayfelt played just 2 seasons in the NBA for the Baltimore Bullets and Milwaukee Hawks. He signed a contract with Boston in 1952, but was ultimately cut from the final roster. Bob Cousy ended up being the best player in the draft. With his fancy pants dribbling and passing, he led the NBA in assists 8 times. He also won 6 championships, was the 1957 MVP, was an All-Star in each of his 13 seasons with Boston, was 10 times first-team All-NBA, and oh yeah, was the first freaking president of the National Basketball Players Association. So, I guess he was a little better than a local yokel after all. After the Capitals folded midway through his rookie season, Dick Schnitker served 2 years in the military before returning to the NBA to win 2 championships with the Minneapolis Lakers. Fun fact, he was the first player in NBA history to play in a finals game despite not playing a single game during the regular season. Comment below if you know the other 2 players who have done the same thing. Larry Faust has a case for being the best NBA player who's not in the Hall of Fame. He was an 8-time All-Star, made the 1955 All-NBA first team, led the league in rebounding in 1952, in field goal efficiency in 1952, and had 5 appearances in the NBA Finals with 3 different teams. George Yardley spent 3 years in the military from 1951 to 53. When he came back to the NBA, he was pretty dang good. He was the first NBA player to score over 2,000 points, which he did in 1958. He was also a 6-time All-Star, 2-time All-NBA, and became the first player to retire even though he averaged 20 points in his final season. Bob Lavoie had 3 solid seasons playing as a starter for the Indianapolis Olympians, before spending his final season in 1954 with the Hawks and Nationals. He would later coach the University of Tampa men's team from 1958 to 66. Joe McNamee won a championship as a rookie with the Rochester Royals. He would split his time between playing for the Royals and Bullets the following year, before quitting professional basketball in 1952. Kevin O'Shea played 3 years in the NBA for the Lakers, the Bullets, and the Hawks, averaging 5.2 points per game. Don Lofgren played 4 years in the NBA for the Nationals, Olympians, Warriors, and Hawks. How come so many of these guys played for the Hawks later in their careers? Tragically, he would die at the age of 47 due to alcohol poisoning. Chuck Cooper played for 3 different NBA teams over 6 seasons. While his Celtics teammates accepted him with grace, Cooper had to deal with severe racism during his few years in the pros, such as being denied service at hotels and restaurants in certain cities he had to play in. Although Cooper was the first black player drafted, Earl Lloyd was the first black player to actually appear in an NBA game, which he did on Halloween night, 1950. 7 games into the season, Lloyd was drafted into the military, but upon his return, he became one of the best defensive forwards of the era, and even won a championship with the Syracuse Nationals in 1955. Lloyd's Washington teammate, Bill Sharman, would drive Lloyd to and from his house, because Earl did not have a car. Sharman was selected by the Fort Wayne Pistons in a dispersal draft after the Washington franchise folded, but he was traded to Boston as part of the Chuck Scher deal. Sharman made 8 All-Star games, won the 1953 All-Star Game MVP, was selected to 7 All-NBA teams, and won 4 championships. He became the perfect two-guard to play alongside Cousy in the backcourt. Sharman was incredibly efficient for a jump-shooting guard in the 1950s. He led the NBA in free throw percentage 7 times, which is still a record, believe it or not, and he also became one of the greatest coaches in NBA history after retiring in 1961, often credited with the creation of pregame shoot-around and instilling health guidelines and routines for his teams, which weren't widely practiced at the time. Paul Unruh never played in the NBA. Bud Grant played one final year for the Lakers in 1951, before jumping sports to play for the Philadelphia Eagles. In 1967, he was hired to be the head coach for the Minnesota Vikings, and while he never won a Super Bowl, he remains the Vikings' most successful coach to date. George King became a legend of the 1955 finals. As a member of the Syracuse Nationals, he was the player who scored the game-winning free throw and had the game-clinching steal in the final seconds of the game to win Syracuse the championship. After retiring as a player in 1958, he became a college basketball coach, famously leading Purdue to the 1969 championship game. Of the 121 players who were selected in this draft, only 40 of them chose to actually play in the NBA. Of those 40, only 17 players had a career longer than 2 seasons. I'll see you for the next historical draft. Hope you have a good day. Take care.